Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Thomasine. I'm just gonna wait another minute while people are signing on to join us so we don't leave anyone behind. While we're waiting, I just wanna let people know that if you look at the chat section, you will be able to find some information there as well as write in questions as we get going with our conversations. Okay, so I'm gonna start. First of all, my name is Thomasine Dolan. I'm the director of material innovation and design at MII. MII is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting the development and commercialization of sustainable, environmentally preferable, and animal-free fibers for the fashion, home, and auto industries. MII recently published our second What Makes Silk report. This is an updated report that includes recent scientific studies as well as profiles of next-gen silk innovators. In this report, we talk about silk's performance and aesthetic versatility, as well as the challenges around the production of silk and is there room for improvement. Through a scientific lens, we examine where silk comes from and how it actually is made by looking at the Bombyx mori moth, commonly known as the bee mori moth. And of course, spiders. Spiders make an incredibly strong filament fiber. We will also look at the negative environmental impact of silk at the production level and acknowledge that we can only cite available data from studies done in India, while most silk production is in China. We recognize that the number one mimic of silk today is polyester, developed in the 40s and introduced into fashion in the 1950s. And now, because of its chameleon-like capabilities, it accounts for more than half of all global fiber production. It seemingly is blended with everything, making it an environmental and recycling nightmare. So, as mentioned in this report, we profile 14 different innovators who are creating the next generation of silk. Today, we will be speaking with 3 of these extraordinary innovators who are using different technologies to create silk-like filament fibers that not only mimic silk, but have the potential to replace the polyester and nylon versions of silk we see today. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists and where they work. I'm going to start with Martin Lankes. He's the Senior Product Manager of Fiber Business at AMSilk. And if Martin, you don't mind, I'm just going to give a brief overview of AMSilk. I will do that for everyone. So I appreciate your patience. The AMSilk founders were inspired by silkworm production. AMSilk makes a silk protein via bacterial fermentation. It is produced by genetically engineered microbes and spun into fiber. It is a high-performance filament fiber that is thinner and more delicate than traditional animal-based silk. AMSilk's material is biodegradable in marine, anaerobic, and aerobic conditions, and it contains no petrochemicals. AMSilk is headquartered in Germany. Next, with us is Shannon Parker. She's the Director of Industry Engagement and Impact Strategy at Circ. Circ's textile-to-textile recycling regenerates cellulose from the cotton portion of polycotton textile waste to create Circ lyocell. They can produce filament fibers matching silk. Circ's mission is to recycle global fashion waste back into like-new materials, creating a circular economy, and in the process, reducing the need for petroleum, trees, and other materials that are harvested from nature to manufacture clothes. Circ is headquartered in Danville, Virginia, and they are a B Corp. And last but not least is Billy McCall. He's a polymer scientist and co-founder of Kintra Fibers. Kintra makes biosynthetic yarns. They use a fermentation process to fine-tune their yarn into a wide range of biosynthetic knit and woven textiles that perform like traditional technical fabrics, but they degrade like a natural fiber with no harmful effects on the environment. Some of the fabrics they've made mimic a lightweight woven silk taffeta and a knit with a cashmere-like hand feel. Kintra is headquartered in Brooklyn. And thank you all for joining me today, and thank you for your patience in sitting through that. So I'm excited to get speaking to everyone, and I'm actually just going to jump right into some really meaty stuff and talk about your current status regarding scaling and being commercial, and just to sort of set the pace or the tone for where everybody is on that landscape, and to give our audience an idea. So Martin, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start with you. But I know you've been ramping up for a while at AMSilk, So if you could let us know what stage you're in. Are you doing small production runs? Are you not scaled yet?
Sure, thank you for the introduction. So we are, I mean, what means scaled? So it's obviously a wide range if it comes to scaling up an industry. We started 2008, and it took us the first few years to come up with like a small portion of protein by the fermentation way. And I would say one milestone was reached around 2015, where we made the few first kilogram batches of proteins, but also fibers. Now, since last year, we are scaling into tons. That means we are, as you know, as described, we are fermenting the proteins with microbes, and we reached already a ton scale there last year. And this year, we also are scaling up the fiber production on a ton scale. This is still a very small amount in the textile industry. But for me, the scaling up is like really the hard part of our job. There are tons of, small startups trying to make biofabricated fibers, yarns, and other products. And the scaling is, for us, really the hardest part.
Mhm. And what is it about? And I would like to ask Parker and Billy the same question. Like, can you be specific about what is it that's so difficult? Is it raising money? Is it, iterations, the trials that happen, or is it manpower and staffing, or equipment?
Shall I continue, or is Billy or
Actually, well, maybe
now you
either.
guys
I
go?
love it because you might share the hurdles, or
Sure.
you might have different. Yeah. So Billy.
Yeah, I can share my 2 cents. I think that the biggest thing with scaling, regardless if you have infrastructure or not built out, is it's a massive cash burn, right? I mean, if you're producing at the 1 ton scale or going up to 50 tons per day or something, I mean, just the raw material requirements, the inputs, utilities, things like that, shipping, receiving, it becomes a different ball game. So if your formulation or your process isn't like 99.9% there, like those small discrepancies are going to be magnified once you start scaling, and you get a bad batch that's a very large bad batch that's a huge waste of money. So it does take a lot of time to get to the point where you're ready for that larger scale. And I can only imagine what it's like for fermentation. We do synthetic chemistry, so we try to use highly pure materials going into our process, and even that can be very challenging. So
You just listed so many things that I wouldn't have even considered, like the shipping and receiving. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about impurities with inputs or feedstock. And Parker, this seems like a good jumping off place for you to talk about feedstock, because you're that must be hard to get transparency with feedstock sometimes, or maybe you guys, and I don't know if that's something that slows you down or it's not a problem at all.
Yeah. I mean, before I weigh in on feedstock, I want to 100% agree with Billy. First of all, I think that this idea that scale is a destination and not a journey is something that we definitely need to challenge. Scaling is iterative, right? Going from 1 kg to 1 ton is massive. Going from 1 ton to 50 tons is massive. Going from 50 to, 60,000 tons or 200 tons a day is massive. And it's all challenging. It's challenging from a CapEx requirement. It's challenging from balancing people with that burn rate. It's challenging even matching existing assets in the industry. I mean, that's one of the big things that we've faced is like people are ready to adopt and their minimum order quantities are, 10 tons. And it's like, okay, well, we'll get back to you in a year at the moment. And Circ's, been able to come over a lot of these challenges kind of in the past year, or two really, since 2018 when we started our textile journey. But I think it's just important to keep in mind that scaling is not a destination, it's a journey. And we really need good partners throughout the industry that are willing to take each step with us overall. On your feedstock question, certainly the transparency, purity, things going in, that's something that we're absolutely addressing, at the scale that we're at right now. It's easy to procure like a highly trusted source of feedstock, but as we scale, building out trusted supplier networks to source waste around the world and make sure that we know what's going into our process is certainly a challenge that we're facing over the next few years. I will say the fortunate thing for us, our process is really robust and we're able to take, for example, the blended polycotton textiles that historically aren't recyclable and turn them into a really pure form of cellulose. So the filtration benefits that we have in our process is certainly helpful, but that doesn't mitigate, some of the broader supply chain transparency and traceability challenges that we see, whether that's waste or on the garment fiber and dyeing level, for sure.
Thank you you brought up a lot of great points that we're definitely going to be touching on through the rest of this conversation, but and first of all, thank you for framing it as a journey. I think that is important, and it's a really good point, so thank you. And transparency, I feel like you touched on that. We definitely want to get to that later, as we know that that's important to brands as they try to, especially if they want to market things, right? They need to know that there's transparency and certification to some degree. But I did want to ask you a question, about, you said like going from, whether it's 1 ton to 10 tons or 10 tons to 100 tons, like each of those things can be like a huge lift to get to that point. Like what are because I don't have that sort of production level in my background. So what is it? Is it like machinery breaks down, or is it just everything? Like what are the, what happens in making those leaps from one metric?
Yeah. Go ahead, Martin.
Maybe I don't know about how old the other companies are, but we started really small. We started like with 2-liter fermenters and bioreactors. And now we are sitting with partners on 75,000 liter bioreactors. And if we are also venture capital in like financed, and if you want to build a fermentation line with 75,000 liters bioreactors, we're talking a significant chunk of millions of dollars. So, and there's no equipment really that is, defined and, really made for our needs. So either you have stuff that is made for the food industry that is producing proteins the fermentational way, but the quality is on a different level. I mean, I'm not saying that stuff is somehow bad, but it has a different purity and quality than a huge, silk protein. So, and to get a supply chain where you can, jump in and use those assets that is matching your requirements and needs from a technical perspective is a really hard thing. And it's an organic process. So whenever you start with 5-liter to 500 liters, the reactors are using, they are behaving differently. So it's an organic growth, and also you have to learn and iterate, step by step. And there's, from our perspective, no drop in fermentation capacity that works the way we need it from a Silk perspective. The second thing, like making fibers out of the proteins, is almost similar. To go on a spinning line that is available, you might have to be really lucky that it works in terms of solvents or precipitation liquids. So here also, if you want to build it from scratch, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. So here also you have to find partners, CMOs, or however you call it, who are able to bring the process alive. But it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of, intellectual, let's say, acceptance, and you have to fall back, and it's not an easy one.
Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you for that. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything onto that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Martin said. I mean, a good example is spinning. Like, I think there's plenty of facilities in our, I guess, sphere of materials. Melt spinning is one of the most common ways to produce fibers. Even so, getting on a facility like that is, relatively easy if you have enough material. The challenging thing is, you might get something that looks good at, you're spinning 15 kilos. What happens when you spin continuously for 7 days straight? Like, that's an entirely different type of science that you're studying at that point. And the little impurities or you know, processing window that you thought you had becomes shrunk, or you know, the thing that you didn't think was going to be a big problem is a big problem, and you kind of have to go back to the drawing board, like Martin said, and it's very organic, and you have to, you know, treat each stepping stone like, hey, we made it here, that's great, we can, you know, see how we can test the market with the quantity that we have, but if we want more market share, if we want to get our prices down, we have to go to that next step, add another zero to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I was going to hold questions till the end, but but Billy, while you were speaking, someone wrote in, actually Tim wrote in that, and I don't know if you can address this now, but wondering if there were economic advantages or disadvantages between melt spinning versus wet spinning.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would probably agree that melt spinning is more economically advantageous just because you don't have to deal with solvents and recycling any material. You're just heating a polymer up and extruding it. That's my opinion. I don't know, everyone else can, or some, you know, Martin and Shannon can speak to that. I know they have maybe more wet processes.
We have a wet spinning process, and it is so I can only see it from our perspective. It is a very interesting field, and in Europe especially, there's another lot of factories around that are, you know, wet spinning experts. So it's really hard to get one. The majority here is, you know, melt spinning, like polyester polyamide. So it's pretty tough to find someone who's a wet spinning expert and willing to start for like a small startup. From an economical perspective, I cannot put it into dollar quotes, but wet spinning, you have to recycle the solvents, you have to recycle the precipitation liquids. You might have to have a line that is, safe and it doesn't explode because there are liquid chemistry around with solvents. So it's quite an effort to do wet spinning. I mean, we all know polyester, and we come to that later. Polyester is the cheapest fiber right now, like in huge scale, dominating the global fiber market because it's melt spinning. It's rather easy, you know.
Yeah. I will say from Circ's perspective, I'm certainly not the right person to speak on the wet spinning versus melt spinning. I am not as wonderfully technical here as Martin and Billy. I think for us, the spinning challenges that we see broadly are again coming to matching scale. Martin kind of mentioned here that you can't find somebody that wants to take on small quantities, and even if you do, often kind of the startup cost in terms of material is the same in order to be able to fine tune and plug into these existing processes. So if I give someone, 5 tons to run on one of their commercial lines, maybe the startup cost is 2 tons of that fiber as lost product because they're trying to fine tune it to the fiber. And so that's a big challenge really in this scaling space as it relates to spinning. That material is so valuable, and yet we have to deal with those yield losses in order to better understand the process and get through some of the fibers. And that certainly is something that feeds back into like the impact and the sort of transparency conversation with LCA that we were talking about a little bit previously and later on, Thomasine.
Thank you. I also think this speaks to why it can be so difficult to get swatches from startup innovators because of all those things you just said. It's like it can be very difficult to get from the next step, and then things break down or things get. I know that getting headers and swatches aren't as easy as getting it from traditional mills and companies. So I appreciate that. Well, this is a little easy segment here, but I wanted to talk about how you all got into this space from where you were. So Billy, again, I knew you're a polymer scientist and you studied nanoengineering. You're a nano engineer, but I know I think there was a real trigger point for you while you were working somewhere else that you thought you wanted to make a change or make a difference. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think anyone who works in like the polymer industry or the chemical industry, you're first of all exposed to a lot of different materials, quite literally, when you make stuff. A good example of that is polyurethane, which relies on some pretty nasty starting raw materials. Furthermore, when you're designing materials and like the typical kind of old school way of designing polymers is, you know, are the raw materials cheap and abundant? Is the reaction really efficient and quick? And is the product like more or less bulletproof? Like, can you put it through stress tests and it survives? That was great. I mean, for the time being, in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and like the heyday of a lot of these, the growth spurts of a lot of these, you know, large oil and gas companies, they developed a lot of really interesting stuff from a scientific perspective. But, you know, we're now living in a day and age where we're starting to reap some of the negative consequences of a lot of those actions. And again, like synthetic chemistry works really well at scale. I mean, clearly we have things like polyethylene, polyester, the two probably biggest workhorses of the industry. They're very efficient to make when you have a large supply like oil feeding it. My kind of call to action was realizing, hey, I'm kind of part of that system right now. I'm also designing materials just for their performance benefit, but we're not really thinking about, you know, the use span of a material versus the lifespan of the actual product. You know, a t-shirt, for example, you might get so many washes and wears out of it. The t-shirt will fail before the material, right? I mean, the polyester will get you'll get a rip in your shirt, you'll get a stain in it. The material is still there, but the product is gone. And then what happens to that product? Like, what do we do with it? So that sort of realization, you know, I'm also I'm a surfer, skier, climber. I love being outdoors. I grew up in Northern California, very blessed to grow up in a very beautiful environment there. And so I care about, you know, my impact on the world, and microfibers is another big sort of call to action for me, and realizing the stuff I was wearing was shedding, getting into the environment. And at the worst cases, you know, it's not great for the environment and people. And the other half of it is we just don't even really know the effects. Like, there's so much stuff out there. There's so many fibers out there, and we're still figuring out like the meaning of all that. So that was kind of my limit. And I figured, hey, if, you know, I love designing materials and making them, can we create something that, you know, matches the performance of the incumbent products that are out there? Can we scale it the same way that those products were scaled? And can we switch up the beginning of life, so where we source the raw materials from? And can we also design the product beyond having just good physical performance or some use in a product? You know, can it be chemically recycled? Can it be composted? Are there other ways of upcycling the product in any way? Like, people haven't really thought about, or that wasn't really the mindset back in the 70s and 80s when people were designing or optimizing, you know, things like PET and nylon. It was how to make it cheaper, quicker, more durable, you know, all the rest of it. So yeah, it was kind of a personal and professional melding together, and it made the most sense for where I was at in my life. So here we are 6 years later.
Yeah, that's perfect. I feel like there are probably a lot of people in the innovation space who had similar journeys, you know. And so, Martin, I'd love to hear about yours. Now, I know that you started off working for a brand, right? For an athletic footwear brand.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. So actually, my motivation, I was also a climber and a skier when I was young. And so I was very keen to go into the textile industry from my perspective of performance. So I worked for Helly Hansen, for Patagonia, for Adidas. So performance-oriented sporting goods brands. And it was always about performance, you know, higher, faster, you know, where's the benefit? How can I get, you know, more out of the day, lighter? And from this performance perspective, what we figured out in Europe, that already 10, 15 years ago, there was a move coming from Scandinavia towards a more environmental friendly, you know, way how to produce apparel and sporting goods. And we talked about all these challenges before, you know, challenges of scaling, challenges of, you know, getting, you know, capex and, you know, all that. But I think what is for AMSilk and also for me really true is that we're all intrinsically driven to make products, even if it's hard, that are purpose driven. And we are contributing towards a better product, not even a more product and sell more, but sell something with a good, you know, footprint, which is biodegradable, which is not harming the oceans by relieving microplastics. So that's what drives us on, and that also motivates me. And I think that's also we share here, all the guys here on the panel, because the textile industry is not a great business; it's a dirty business also. And just envision globally, 35 billion pairs of shoes are produced every year, and they are made from all kinds of PU, PET, PA, thermoplastical hybrids. It's like very hard to recycle. And if someone is telling, yeah, we can recycle that, dig deeper and really figure out how do you do it? Do you separate the stuff, the layers and the adhesives, and the midsoles from the outsoles and the uppers from the laces? And if you really dive deep, you know that the recycling story has its end. So economically and also technically, as a huge challenge to overcome.
Well, that's a perfect segue to Parker, because you mentioned recycling. But just before I switch over to Parker, I just wanted to say that, Martin, I think your brand experience definitely brings an extra sparkle, I guess, to the work you're doing, because you understand the cadence of how brands work. You understand how designers work and what they're looking for. So I think that's it's very good for AMSilk to have someone like you who has that view of what it's like. So Parker, he mentioned recycling, and I know a bit about your background, and which is really interesting. And I thought one of the things that was that maybe we could talk about, because it's so relevant, is that I believe you founded an LCA company, or a group that focuses on LCAs. Could you talk about that and anything else that you feel is relevant in your background?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give the 60,000 foot version of my background, which is really that I started out my career in manufacturing operations, decided that I needed to do something related towards sustainability. Thought it was going to be in supply chain sustainability. I worked in some larger brands like WeWork and Under Armour, consulting on their CSR teams, and found sort of a passion for materials in that way. What goes into our homes, our spaces, our clothes, everything like that. But at the same time, caught the kind of entrepreneurial bug and startup, and actually went and founded a company called Carbon Insights that was we developed a product that could tell you the carbon, land, and water use of any financial transaction using a method that's called EIO, or Economic Input Output Life Cycle Assessment. So came from a bit of a background in sort of CSR, supply chain engagement, LCA, and impact measurement. And then pretty serendipitously, all my interests sort of aligned and merged as we were selling Carbon Insights. I had a love for textiles. I had a love for innovation and small entrepreneurial companies, and really came to Circ. That was an amazing organization, very purpose-driven, trying to solve a lot of these challenges that both Billy and Martin speak to in terms of really decoupling the growth, the immense growth that we see in the fashion and textile sector from its impact on the environment, both at the beginning of life in terms of raw material resource use, and at the end of life, where we see, large amounts of textiles being burned or dumped. So I think it's really fascinating to come from an impact perspective, because it helps, me and Circ understand and learn to speak the language that brands are asking about, right? I think depending on the stakeholders of brands we're talking to, maybe it comes down to price and volume and X, Y, and Z. But if you're speaking to the sustainability team, it's about carbon impact, eutrophication, these sorts of things, and making sure that we're solving one environmental challenge without creating another, right? There's this idea of path dependency. We can't just blindly go down creating new materials without making sure they are truly better. And I think that's what all these innovators are really here to do, is create better, less impactful materials overall.
Thank you for that answer. It's like you're reading my questions, because that's actually, I'm going to sort of pivot off what you just said to talk to Billy and Martin, and then I want to circle back to you about your role at Circ, because I find it's really interesting, and I think that brands, it's going to be really helpful to know that Circ has hired someone like you and what you manage and what you do. But before I get to that, I want to talk to Billy and Martin about again, this is back to that journey word again, but the journey of iterating your fibers, your yarns, testing and testing and testing. While that development was going on, were you simultaneously thinking about things like LCAs, end of life, and circularity? Was that happening at the same time? Maybe Billy, you can start.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it happened before I even got into the lab, right? I mean, the whole figuring out what is the best system is something you can do quite easily just in a simple thought experiment. There's a lot of data out there on specific chemistries, how people might treat them at the end of life. Yeah, I mean, before I even started creating the material, it was, hey, what's the best shot here in terms of, again, that the three considerations are always performance, price, and how good is it for the environment, or what's the least amount of impact it's going to do. So that was something that I spent probably half a year really digging deep into and doing my research and coming up with the solution that I felt was the best that I could do at the time. And yeah, I think so. That's kind of baked in as a founding principle to our company is, designing a material that has as many degrees of freedom as possible at the end of its life. Not just going all in on one way or the other. I mean, the industry is constantly shifting. We have to remind ourselves, like, we're a material science company. We're not a recycling company. We're not a feedstock company. Maybe that will change in the future, but we're talking 5-10 years in the future of potentially verticalizing and seeing if it makes sense for us to own those parts of the value chain. But realistically, I mean, even just for things like recycling, like you have to start thinking about having like a reverse Amazon style logistics operation, collecting and sorting products, getting them to the right facilities, and then making sure that they're acceptable to go into this process. So we have our hands filled designing our polymer that we want and being able to spin it and make products that people like and that fits in the value chain with dyeing and finishing. And that already is a pretty heavy load. And we're happy to say, hey, that's where we're adding value to this whole thing. And yeah, the other thing too is, like, being a scientist, you're always constantly striving to improve everything that you do. And I think the toughest part about running any organization where you're developing a physical product is, at what point do you draw the line and say, hey, we got to stop here, and this is the commercial MVP or whatever you want to call it. We'll separate that from the basic R&D, and balancing those two things and making sure that one isn't getting too out of control versus the other one is kind of an art in a sense. So that's how we've been dealing with it for the past 6 years. But yeah, to answer your question, like, yeah, we thought about this from the beginning, the circularity aspect.
Perfect. Yeah. And Martin, the same question to you. Was it baked into your technology?
Actually, we did not. So we started 2008 with the idea to have really a man-made fiber that is as strong or even stronger than silk by applying a super clean, super pure fibrin protein to the world. So it was really technology and performance driven. Over the years, we learned that it resonated a lot at the consumer base if our product is bio-based, so decoupled from fossil, raw materials, and also is biodegradable. And now I would say on a weight, I think the sustainable bit already, gained so much momentum that, I mean, performance is given. You have to reach a certain performance minimum criteria. But the brands we work with, they want to differentiate versus others. And the differentiation right now is really made by a sound, sustainable, story. Not just, a greenwashing story, a quick one, but really something that has enough substance. And yeah, times are changing. And as Billy said, so nowadays, I think the environmental bit is definitely super key for us.
I really appreciate your honesty with that, Martin, about back in 2008, that wasn't the guiding principle. So I really appreciate your honesty and how you had to probably back up at some point or slow down and re-examine things. So that's awesome. Parker, I wanted to get back to you about your role at Circ, because I think that what you do, it seems like you touch on so many different aspects with different stakeholders. and just wanted to learn a little bit about more about that and share that with the audience. So please.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, the role that I hold at Circ is really unique, and I absolutely love it. I think it's pretty multifaceted. You know, the title doesn't necessarily catch it all, but what it really means is that working on industry engagement, I am working with regulators, I'm working with voluntary certifications, I am working with brands, I am working with feedstock providers to help build circular systems. So I think Billy and Martin both alluded to it. Oh, go ahead.
So when you say regulators, could you be more specific?
Really working with both, I'd say, advocacy organizations and directly with regulation, both in the US and EU abroad. So there's a number of different bodies that are looking at this kind of wave of textile legislation that's coming into play. Mostly in the EU. We're working on some things over here, the federal and state level, but so providing yeah. But providing feedback and an innovator's perspective on how we design inclusive circular systems rather than systems that benefit the incumbents, right? If we're considering all this new legislation that's designing for products for circularity, how are we ensuring that it's inclusive of new next generation technologies? For example, textile labeling regulations. Many textile labeling regulations don't allow you to name new fibers that don't go through traditional processes.
I love that you brought that up. I know, I love that. I'm constantly thinking about labels and content labels and anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
It's a massive challenge. When we said like scaling is hard no matter what, there's all these little road bumps and there's the big challenges too. And so my role is pretty broad in terms of addressing and looking at these issues strategically for Circ, but also while speaking the language of impact. You know, I think like I said, Billy, Martin, they both alluded to the balance, right? We're big believers that materials need to be out there in the world for as long as they possibly can before they come back to be recycled. And we're also very aware of the fact that these circular systems don't fully exist yet. Those reverse logistics, the collection, the how do we prevent this leakage of textiles into the environment, that question's yet to be answered. And so that's really where my role comes in terms of helping to catalyze these connections with upstream infrastructure to ensure that we're, you know, sourcing our feedstock from reliable, transparent organizations, but also building pathways to be able to handle waste from post-industrial all the way through to post-consumer. So I could go on for days, for hours. You know, I won't, and I probably threw out a bit of jargon there specifically to recycling, but
you touched on a lot of things, and I feel like I could keep asking you questions for days. So thank you. Now you also mentioned, or Billy and Martin have both touched on performance a few times, and I did want to talk about that with each of you and your fibers. And knowing that silk and polyester have like really high off the charts performance qualities, and trying, you know, are you using that as a standard, or are you trying to operate within your own class of fiber and yarn? Because we are sort of approaching this place of a new class of, I'm sort of paraphrasing Jen Keane from Modern Synthesis here, but when she talked about the materials being a new class of textile or materials, I feel like these are in some ways new classes of fibers and yarns as well. So can you talk about performance characteristics that your yarns have? Maybe Billy, start.
Sure, yeah. So I think anytime you have a new material in general, trying to make a comparison to say it is like that is always a losing battle. We also have to be able to benchmark ourselves and say, yeah, well, we are a synthetic and we do have some attributes that are similar to polyester in terms of strength. You know, we have good abrasion resistance, similar to nylon, but we're much softer. We have a different look and feel about us. So we're not necessarily measuring our performance against any one particular fiber. We're being very organic about it and saying, let's take this as like a completely blue sky approach and see what types of fiber profiles we can make, which happen to be quite a lot, which is a huge benefit of working in the synthetic space. You know, we can make staple fiber, we can make non-wovens, we can make filament fibers, and we can do all sorts of denier ranges and texturizing steps and finishing and whatnot. So we can, for the most part, make our fiber look and feel like whatever we want it to. The silk stuff that I know, Thomasine, you've had the chance to, have and feel, that was kind of a happy accident of us creating a really low denier yarn, lightweight fabric, completely flat yarn, and it just so happened to have a very, silky feel to it. And we love that. I mean, it's fun to discover that stuff. Our textile scientist the other day just made a knit structure that feels like cotton. And a lot of that is just due to how the material is processed and the profile that you're hitting. In terms of like the intrinsic properties that we're interested in maximizing, I mean, it's taken us so long just to get to a point where we get to feel out what our material space looks like. And then from there, we can make a decision of, hey, turns out we can make like a really high strength material. Maybe we can tune the elongation, maybe we can tune, stretch recovery, which is another kind of happy little accident that we discovered when we started creating the fibers. All that stuff is tunable, and it's really going to be something that we work with brands on. And another kind of case study with that is we have a modulus of a stiffness. Essentially, our material is less stiff than cashmere. I mean, that's kind of a superpower in my mind of, typically people think about a synthetic polymer adding rigidity and, affects things like drape in the hand. We can make a thicker fiber that has better drape than a typical synthetic, and we can blend it with things like cotton, and we have a light stretch. And then you start getting in this concept of maybe even obviating the need for spandex in some applications. So all that's to say, we're really interested in just throwing stuff out there and seeing what brands are gravitating towards and really trying to highlight what we think our strengths are. And again, being a distinct product, being unique, being differentiated, not trying to be like silk or like polyester.
Great. Martin, how about you?
I fully agree with Billy. So of course, we are measuring our products in terms of performance characteristics against silk or whatnot, polyester, polyamide. But from a marketing perspective, I'm trying to not replace something which is already out there, because I've been to Adidas for 2 years and I've seen like every week, dozens of innovations from all over the world. And they said, wow, that's the new whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then you compare it to something that's existing. Like in an Excel chart, you say, that's, the specific strength, that's the density, that's the abrasion, that's the price, bam, you're out. Because you are competing against established and very, already honed in products. So, we also would like to establish a new product class. You just also on the MII, you said there's a value added to it. And consumers are willing, I think 60-something% are willing to pay an extra for it because it's innovative, because it's new to the world. And that's why we are trying very hard to not compare ourselves directly to silk or cellulosic fibers. Even if we are chemically very congruent with silk. So we are protein fiber that is almost identical with mulberry silk. But we would like to go into a new market, a new segment, in a new area.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and probably very wise from a business decision to not compare. And I also wonder about we talk about this at MII all the time, performance metrics sometimes being out of line with what a real consumer need is for that particular item, whether it's an apparel item or, shoes probably do have a lot of performance needs there, but sometimes I do wonder that things might be over-engineered, that they don't need to be as high performing as some of the other fibers. So lastly, before we move on to the next topic, because you've sort of mentioned a few things now, what are end uses for each of your yarns and fibers? So Parker, start with you, please.
Sure.
What do you see brands end uses for? What you can put out?
Yeah, I mean ours is perhaps a little easier to mentally frame up. We create intermediate products, whether that's dissolving pulp or PET chip from recycled materials, and those drop into existing processes. So we don't face quite as much of the uphill battle as Martin and Billy over here are really fighting, and they're fighting the good fight. So we can think about things in the framework of polyester, or really more specifically for this call, lyocell. We've been able to produce lyocell staple fiber. We've been able to produce lyocell filament, and also look at another range of MMCF fibers and filaments as well. So I think that's really important, because we know that there's a very small amount of lyocell filament that is produced out there in the world. It's really challenging to make. If you've ever visited a viscose lyocell spinning facility, those processes are absolutely fascinating, and it goes to the point where we're talking about contamination earlier. Any tiny amount of contamination can really cause a break in that filament, and it's it's a massive challenge. So the fact that we're able to produce that, I think that's really speaks, one, to the quality of our fibers, but two, overall the usage that we're able to see. I mean, in our two commercially publicly available launches right now, it's been sort of a brushed lyocell. By Mar Hoffman, it's compared to silk. I think that's really how we got in this area to begin with. But lyocell filament has the possibility to really replace potentially a lot of different forms of filament. We saw, polyester first replace silk. Now we're seeing people look at lyocell to replace polyester, which is encouraging from a biodegradability and from a natural fiber sort of angle. But I'd say we're really the fiber experts. We work with an incredibly strong sort of network of mill partners that are the end use, the textile, the garment experts, to really advise us on how we can use this pulp and that chip in new ways.
Like beyond apparel, for instance,
Exactly. Well, beyond apparel, or even throughout different apparel applications. We've spoken a lot about performance, but also when it comes to silk, you might immediately sort of think luxury. And we've got, like I said, a great network of partners. Pyrotex is a really awesome innovator that we've had the chance to work with to innovate on these fabrics with our lyocell filament to explore the new applications for the
I
material.
would think home textiles would be a possibility, but yeah, you would know
Absolutely.
better than I. Yeah. And Martin and Billy, Martin, if you could start with products
Sure.
that your fibers and yarns are being used for.
Sure, I'm happy. Yeah, so it's a little bit the difference what I just said 3 minutes ago, because we are not really motivated to substitute silk, but that's exactly what we do. So our main focus is right now the luxury fashion. So coming from Paris, from Rome, from Milano, and we have here a very carefully selected portfolio of brands who are really going after animal-free or cruelty-free silk fibers filament type. And that's the focus right now in terms of growing and making an impact here for the first few years. It's pretty simple. I mean, we cannot, and I guess it's also relevant for Billy, but we cannot supply fibers in a price competitive range that would attack polyamide or polyester. No way. So we have to find. So we have to. Exactly. So we have to find, like Billy said, something like that sounds like cashmere or silk or high price wool. That is the market is able to to work with prices of new and innovative fibers.
Yeah.
So that's our main target right now. And so we are going to place silk, but actually also interesting, we are having great contacts in the automotive industry, and the automotive guys, they have right now a trend to replace leather by anything that is animal free, but also on a high value level. So I mean, there's one brand that started with electric cars that have been the first who said they are animal free, and what they did is that include polyurethane in the car. I don't know if that's any better than leather, actually. So So we have brands that are looking for something that is really high valued and perceived as something really innovative and really luxurious and premium product, but that is animal free and it works also over the lifetime of a car. So there we actually replace leather, which is a completely different animal than silk. But that's the span, what we can do with our fibers. As Billy also said, we can influence the title, like the thickness, the denier, staple fiber or filament-like fibers. And that's the beautiful thing of textile industry. When you start with the filament or yarn, you can really build a fabric that does all kinds of jobs.
So, Billy, I want to switch to you because actually we only have 10 more minutes. I can't believe this. And I want to make sure we get to a few more things. So, Billy, I don't know if this is just from talking to or reading lots of things about Kintra, but I know that I feel like you've struck on this trifecta of types of brands or types of products, meaning because of the versatility of your fiber, you have brand partners, I think, that operate in luxury, ready to wear, and athletic wear. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think for us, we're not really setting like a price floor on ourselves yet, because I think the way that we've designed the scaling of our product is that we can actually start reaching parity with things like PET once we are at that 100,000 ton per year level. And that's the beauty of synthetics. I mean, right now the way that we produce the resin and the yarn all happens on the same equipment as PET. In fact, it's using less energy because we produce at a slightly lower temperature. It comes down to the raw materials and the availability of those products, which isn't quite mature yet. But again, that's on us and some other companies who make use of our raw materials to make that a thing. But anyway, I mean, back to the applications. I mean, yeah, I already talked about like the different fiber profiles and being able to change, like take one product and morph it into like numerous different products. You know, so we're working on things like fleeces and nice knitwears, outerwear, woven products. Non-wovens are also interesting. I mean, you talk about things like hygienic products and health and beauty. There's also home goods, which is another interesting one for us as well. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different applications, I think, for our product. And I think for now, I think what's exciting about from the brand perspective is that they actually see a runway for us to getting to price parity. I mean, a 1 ton per day facility that produces our resin is already going to be cheaper than the silk figure that I think you threw out in a previous document of like, you know, $50 a kilo.
Yeah.
So like if we're hitting, you know, that or below it at 1 ton per day, I mean, you start going to 30 ton per day, 100 ton per day, the price points get even better. And it really comes down to raw materials is the biggest thing. If our processing is the exact same as PET, you know, raw materials is the big driver of cost. That's your sensitivity point. And then of course, even downstream too, like dyeing and finishing. I mean, we're going to have different sort of metrics there. And that's what we're working on with a lot of our mill partners right now.
Thank you. Well, I want to spend the last 5 minutes talking about mill partners and brand partners. So this is really about co-developing. And Parker, I'll start with you. So you've had obviously 2023 was a good year for co-developing and working with brands. So if you could just give us, you know, a couple of minutes worth of the value of that and what that and if that enabled you as a company to get farther down the road in the journey towards being commercial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to kind of come full circle and touch on what we touched on at the beginning of the webinar, scaling is hard and you need good partners to be able to do it, right? You need partners that are willing to work with you through the challenges every step of the way. And I think Circ's been incredibly fortunate to find those partners in some of our product launches, but also, you know, our investors with Inditex, with Mara Hoffman, and with a lot of our supporting bodies. So we've really worked hand in hand with them to not only supply the fiber, but then work it through their supply chains with the objective of scaling over the long term. And they're able to take our fiber, they're able to try it with, you know, their existing dyeing and like their existing supply chain capacity. And we've gotten really positive feedback both on the quality, but just ease of use of dropping this into the supply chain, which I think is certainly a relief. It's a sigh of relief when it comes to scaling, as if you can plug this into what already exists. It often, similar to the PET assets Billy is talking about, it really does help with the scaling of fiber overall. I think, again, looking at other sort of mill partners, we're always standing up new collaborations, which are really exciting. Last year was a great year for us launching Mara Zara, but also with the Earthshot Prize. And we're really excited through the Earthshot Prize to be collaborating with like dyeing innovators, like Colorifics, looking at those non-toxic dyes. I mean, they've got.
We didn't even get to dyes yet. Oh my God.
I know. I saw the
Too.
question from forgive me, I'm not seeing who it's from in the chat that was in regards to dyes, and I had it on my mind, and just around, all of the partnerships that continue to exist in this industry. I think you find value aligned partners that are really willing to work with this, rather than working with folks that just want to fit and plop you in one of those existing boxes and then compare you on cost. So it's
Interestingly, at least to me, that is all three of you have both mill partners and brand partners that are working with you. So that seems like an incredible accelerator, because the mill partners help you get to that plug and play place to make sure you really are plug and play, right? And to make sure that you're using existing equipment and don't necessarily have to engineer new stuff. And then the brand partners can help you, I would imagine, I mean, I would love to hear this from you, but like what the whole manufacturing process is like, and how are your fibers, once they're woven or knitted, can they be cut and sewn, can they be? So actually, Billy and Martin, if you could just give us a minute or so of that. I'm so sorry to shrink it like that, but like 2 minutes of those experiences.
Yeah, I'll just go really quickly. I mean, I think that the simple reason why we work with mill partners is because we don't make the fabric product, right? I mean, maybe Martin will say the same thing, but like we make resin and yarn. We are not mill experts. They are. The brands also give direction to the mills in terms of what products they're interested in making. And we kind of glue the whole thing together by saying, hey, here's how you have to handle the material during processing. So it's this really symbiotic relationship where everyone helps each other and gives, spends their part on the project that they need. And it's been a really successful way to do business with people.
Absolutely. I also try to keep it here quick and short. So we have partners in all kinds of level of the value chain: fermentation, spinning, and then we also have a network on weaving, knitting, dyeing, which is actually running quite well. So we can drop it in as soon as it's spun to filament or yarn. The most important partnerships we have are the brand partners. So, and I would call it top down. So if you have a brand partner who is committed, and we have also with our committed partners a bilateral contract where we are putting in, our efforts, our milestones, our targets in a written contract. If that's the case, then we have also the power to go top down along the value chain. Because if you start with like let's say a trunk full of bobbins and go to a mill and say, hey, let's do a trial, please. Let's do a woven fabric. They say, well, sure. But if you have the brand who is asking that mill, hey, I'm brand whatever, ABC, then you have a different lever. And so that's how we work. So our most important partners are, let's say we have 10 out of 700 leads where we have really came up with a joint development agreement, and that's driving the value chain.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And I'm really sorry to cut it off here. Like I said, I still had so many more questions to ask you, and I apologize to the attendees at this webinar that I didn't get to most of those questions, but I hope you will follow up either with me or reach out to the innovators through their websites. Thank you so much. Please go to the Material Innovation website. You can download the report. The actual report, you'll see the profiles of everyone on this webinar, as well as 11 other innovators who are operating in this space. But we thank you so much for your time. And especially thank you, Martin, Billy, and Parker. I really enjoyed talking with you. Hope we get to do it again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.